When I look back on my professional career, there aren't many things I regret. Well, there was that one email that I would totally take back if I could. Although, in fairness, I did learn and grow a lot from the situation. When it comes to regret, it's not the campaigns I ran or the ideas I had that maybe did or didn't see the light of day that I regret. It's all those times that I didn't fight harder for keeping business more human, for putting humanity back into business. It was those times when I was ready to give a pitch or present those findings, and I wanted to have a conversation about how emotional a business-to-business sale is. And I was told, leaders don't want to hear that. Take it out. And I did. Hey, Rogue Nation, it's Chip Rosales here, and I am so glad that you're with us for another episode of While You Were Working. There's so many of you who are vision leaders in your organization. You guys are the ones who are driving that vision. And if that's you, then you're not going to want to miss a second of today's episode. In fact, our guest today is fresh off a speaking gig at the CIA. And so naturally, his next stop was to stop here at the While You Were Working studios. I'd like to introduce Marcel Schwantes. He is a syndicated leadership columnist with Inc. magazine. You've probably read some of his articles. He's a speaker. He's an author. He's in the midst of writing a book. He owns a business. Marcel, you have got to be tired.
I've finally come up for air, Chip. So yes, I've recovered after CIA.
Awesome.
And here I am.
You were telling me some great stories. You had your personal bodyguard. You were without your bodyguard today. We're so glad you're here. I know that you know a little bit about Rogue. We think that different is better here. And so I just want to invite you to kind of share with our audience, when did you decide that you were going to do things just a little bit differently? When did you decide, you know what, I'm going to stand out?
Yeah, I'm going to take you back to 2005.
Awesome.
And as an employee, before I got into the whole leadership development world that I live in, work in, is my worst experience as an employee ended me in the hospital in the ER. So picture me in the ER. Well, what happened? Well, the environment there was so toxic and the leadership structure was so fear-based that it literally, the stress got to a point where it took out my back. So I remember stepping out of the shower one morning, bam, I hit the floor, the back is out, end up in ER. And my recollection to this day was being on the phone to let my superiors know that, hey, you know what, I'm not coming in today. Basically, I'm out. And it ended up being a 2-week disability, right? And I remember to this day, my boss accusing me of insubordination and telling me that I was lying as I was laying there without being able to move in excruciating pain, accusing me of lying. When I came back to work 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, I was told that in order to keep I had to write an apology letter to my boss for taking myself out of this very important project that I was in. So that's just an example that we see across the country in any industry. Whatever business you're in, nonprofit, profit, education, government sector, we have seen these styles of management over the last 50, 75, 100 years. And so so the next boss after that horrendous experience, was a complete 180. His name was Bruce, and Bruce is what we coin in the business world as a servant leader. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have a label for Bruce back then, but Bruce was somebody that was a mentor. Bruce stretched me. He exposed me to new opportunities. He was always available. He gave me great feedback. I always knew where I was with my performance, right? Whether I was on track, because Bruce always communicated well with me, set really good expectations. I always knew exactly where I was headed, and he provided a career path for me. So there was always a place to go. So I kept that in mind. And then as I went about, developing myself as a leader, as a thought leader, and helping other leaders grow, that became my reference point. Bruce was the first servant leader. As I did my research, I realized, wait a minute, the research is describing Bruce 10, 12 years before. Mm. And so I thought, okay, I'm onto something here. The best leaders, and research will prove this over and over, are human-centered leaders. They first talk about, yes, results is important, but you cannot have results at the expense of relationships and people. And that's what the best leaders do.
Can't have results at the expense of relationships. I love that. It makes me think of some advice that, we often give to different people who are, maybe thinking about having a job here or going somewhere else. And we tell them all the time, don't follow a title, follow a leader, follow the person. And so hopefully, I'm looking very much forward to today's episode, trying to see if I can pick up some of those Bruce tendencies as well. Because, I get at the end of the day, I think everybody who's listening here, I know on this particular podcast, everyone who's listening or watching, we're leaders and we want people to follow us. We want that Bruce story. I want a Marcel out there somewhere in the world talking about, his Bruce story, and, me being on the other side of that as the person that they're looking at. So I love that. And a lot of us have to cast a vision. We're trying to achieve some really big outcomes, and we want to get those big results, but not at the expense of being human. So I know you do a lot of talking about human workplaces, human workspaces. You've given us some examples there. You also talk about 6 practices of being a human leader. Would you share those with
Absolutely. So this is really exciting. If anybody wants to take notes, this would be the right time to do it, because I'm about to drop 6 key behaviors on you that is not Marcel's opinion on the matter. All of the research that I've done on what the best leaders do, and when you talk about high-performing cultures, basically it comes down to 6 key behaviors. And they are: 1, you have to display authenticity as a leader, right? 2, you have to value people. 3, you have to develop people. 4, you have to provide leadership. 5, you have to share leadership. And 6, you have to build community. So, Chip, you want me to unpack those? I can do that now, or it's up to you.
That would be absolutely. I mean, I'm over here taking notes right now. So, okay. Yes, go forth.
So why don't we start with how the best leaders value their people? And basically, value people is all about promoting trust first. Most organizations, it's all about, well, I can't trust that person. They have to show me. They have to show me that they're worthy of my trust, right? Well, the best leaders actually extended. This is a very counterintuitive thing to do, Chip. They extend trust as a gift, and it shows people that well, hey, if my boss is able to right off the bat, my first week on the job, extend that kind of trust, how much am I willing to give even more so in response to that kind of trust? The other thing that they do to value people is they're responsive to people's needs. This is the whole crux of servant leadership, right? It's meeting the needs of your workers, not only as employees, but also as human beings. The other thing they do is they believe in others. So they believe in the potential of their employees. And in valuing people, you also want to listen, but listen non-judgmentally and listen receptively. I mean, how many times have you sat in a conversation, Chip, and you're trying to give a great idea, and the other person tramples on whatever you're saying and tries to talk over your points by arguing their points before you're even done. Okay, that's not a conversation. That's competition. So the best leaders, they first listen with the ability to want to know what's going on the other side of the fence. So they listen to understand first. Seek understanding before you want to counterpoint whatever you want to convey back to that person. So the best leaders listen, though, because they want to be able to know, how can I meet the needs of this individual? And that's how you do it, is by listening first. So let's move to the second building block of servant leadership, and that is developing people. Well, how do best leaders develop people? Obviously, you want to provide learning and growing opportunities for them. You want to create a kind of a learning mindset across the organization. So that sets the culture. in the direction that, hey, we're all here to learn and grow together. And that helps to keep people from being competitive inside your own office, right? You're taking a kind of a humble way to say, hey, I want to learn from you. So that means that conversations now become about bettering yourself, whether you're having a conversation with somebody that maybe less experienced than you. Everybody has something to offer. And so there's a term called reverse mentoring, right? It's somebody that's probably my age that sits down over coffee with a 20-something, because I know that there are things that I don't know from that person's standpoint, that person's life experience, that I can learn from. So yes, I take every opportunity to sit down with a millennial. I'm a Gen Xer, right? So I sit down with millennials to kind of understand how they see, how they view life through their lenses. And I always walk away with something new. And it helps me to grow as a person.
It actually makes me think of our environment, our cultural environment right now, and just the politicization, whatever, how you say that word, the politics that go on, and just the way that people, I remember back in 2016 with everything that was going on, I know that we wrote a blog post here, an article that talked about how you can learn from anyone. And, you can look at both sides of the aisle. There's just something to be seen if you'll kind of just do what you just said and stop and listen. And I also know that's a whole lot easier said than done. So, appreciate you kind of like giving those, and not only giving that, but also these practical tips. But it just made me think of that right off the bat. I was like, we live in an environment where we just don't do that. We either think we won't listen, or other people don't have an opinion worth listening to. So I love what you're saying there. It makes a lot of sense.
The hardest thing to do is to be able to park your thoughts and be able to actively listen. It's something that I would encourage everybody on this call to be able to do. It's just sit down and just actually park your thoughts in the process of having a conversation, and just without any agenda on your end, just be able to listen actively to somebody. It will make you a better leader. So the other thing that great leaders do to develop people, so the second building block still develop people, is we don't think enough about the encouragement and the praising piece of developing. Because when people do well, you want to reinforce those behaviors by acknowledging them, by recognizing them. And we're not talking about just an, hey, attaboy, or hey, thanks, Joe. No, we're talking about whatever behavior, whatever performance behavior you want to make sure that is replicated across your organization. You want to make sure that the praise is specific to that behavior, so that other people are seeing that, okay, this obviously is a behavior that we want to be reinforced in our company. And according to Gallup's own research on praise and recognition, if you're in a leadership role now on the call, praise should be extended to an employee at least once per week for high engagement to take place, for that individual to be in that mindset of, hey, I'm valued and appreciated here. Okay, it raises the engagement level, psychologically speaking, for that person. So let's move on to the third one, which is provide leadership. They found Gallup data, as I was going through the research, one of the top reasons people quit their jobs is because their direct bosses don't set goals and expectations, and especially during change, because change can kind of it brings uncertainty in people's minds, right? And so you want to continue to set goals and reset expectations about change and where you're headed, right? So that people are freaking out about, okay, where's this company headed, right? So the best leaders always communicate that. And so you want to communicate goals, not only in the short term, and attach people's jobs, even like the smallest tasks, attach how the small stuff is connected to the bigger picture, okay? And set those goals in the short term as well as in the long term, okay?
I know that as leaders, we sometimes get tired. We get tired of saying what we think we're saying the same thing over and over. And I think other people get tired of hearing us say that. And I know maybe it's a little counterintuitive, but as you're talking about this, I think about that and think, maybe as creatives, and like, we're specifically in that marketing space, we get tired of seeing the same thing and saying the same thing over and over, forgetting that everybody hasn't actually processed and heard it the same way that we have. Do you have any ideas and tips on how you do that, how you practically do that, and get out of our own heads of like saying it over and over, and maybe what the research shows or how you might suggest to places that you're consulting? How do you do that?
Well, I think that it's counterintuitive. Well, let me back up. It's actually common sense, but it's not common practice. When we think about work, we get so caught up in putting out fires, and we get caught up in the tasks, and or even if you're a higher level leader right now on the call, you spend so much time on setting the strategy and carrying out the vision that we forget about how people are naturally wired as human beings to want to experience work, and people want to make sure that they are psychologically safe every day, that they know exactly where they're going. And so that there's no fear involved, because fear is a motivation killer. I mean, you want to disengage your employees as fast as I can say the word fear. Start acting without clear communications and measures in place, right? Pull away from making them feel like they're certain that they know where they're going. That's how you instill fear in your organization. The other way that if you're going to instill fear in your organization, in the hearts and minds of people, is take away their freedom, take away their autonomy. So these are all things that are, yes, you think that it's common sense. We never instill fear in the minds of our children as they grow up, right? We're there to empower them and to make sure that they're supported and guided, and that they have clear expectations at home, right? And that we set goals as parents. It's the same exact thing in the workplace. Employees have to know exactly where they are and where they're headed. So you have to keep reinforcing those principles and setting goals and expectations on a daily basis. People forget, and sometimes people tend to wander and go in places they shouldn't go in their minds. So that's the whole point. Yeah,
it's true. Well, I appreciate you taking us on that little rabbit trail. Thank you for diverting with us. I know I interrupted you. I think you were on.
Yeah, let's move on to the next one, and that is the next building block is that servant leaders, they share leadership. And this is probably the most counterintuitive one, because sharing leadership is all about giving up your control, right? It's releasing control. So the best servant leaders, what they do is they share their power. They share their decision making, and they release their authority by pushing it down to lower ranks. They're pushing that authority down, because what happens is now you're building up the competencies of others down below, so that they're not waiting, let's see what the boss has to say about this, right? They're making decisions on their own. Now you're encouraging ownership and the entrepreneurial spirit to take place in the workplace, where people are now empowered to make decisions on their own. And so what happens is that you no longer have a leader-follower culture. Now you are setting the stage for a leader culture. Information is going to travel way faster. Decisions are going to be made way quicker. And this is kind of but you have to remember, I no longer have the power and control over here. I'm giving it away. So that's share leadership.
It's what we say we want. I mean, it's definitely what we want. We know it's what people want. So.
Absolutely. Second to last is build community. And this is all about the culture. It's establishing a baseline for what kind of values do you want your team or organization to live by. There's a set of rules and rituals and behaviors that the best high-performing companies have. So basically, it's taking the plaque, the fancy words on the plaque on the wall in the conference room, and bringing it down into the trenches and living those out day to day. Okay, you hire people on those values, you promote people on those values, and you certainly terminate those people on those values. So when you have those values, you build community. And so that's the big piece on building community. And as far as building community goes, you cannot have community unless people trust each other. So that goes without saying. And then trust is what's going to get you collaboration at a high level. And then the last one is display authenticity. And this is probably the toughest one, because in displaying authenticity, it's all about showing up with your true self. And sometimes we tend to want to protect ourselves in the workplace, right? We don't want to be vulnerable. And here's another soft word I'm going to throw out at you in displaying authenticity. You want transparency. That's a scary soft word.
The trifecta right there.
So in displaying authenticity, how do you be transparent? Well, first of all, you got to show up with your true self, right? You have to be emotionally honest. Don't sweep things under the rug. The best leaders, they know that they can show up by sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly, because that's what's going to build trust. So nobody's wondering, does he really mean what he's saying, or is he kind of covering things up? Okay. The other way that you display authenticity is you're willing to learn, right? You're not. I see so many times my clients, they want the learning to take place down at the ranks, but they're above learning.
Wow. Yeah.
They're CEOs and executives. Oh no, we've already learned all we can here. Wrong. You have to be able to be authentic enough to consider that learning, and it goes back to that learning spirit I talked about. When you develop others, you're also developing yourself as a leader, as a human being. Display authenticity means empathy and compassion. Now, the empathy piece, obviously, is about being able to understand what's going on, stepping into someone's shoes and understand that person's emotion. Compassion is empathy on steroids. Compassion is the leader or manager that says, I'm going to do whatever it takes to remove and alleviate the suffering of my employees. That's compassion. And that's what the best leaders will do for their employees. And then it goes without saying, in displaying authenticity, you're showing yourself as an honest person and you're acting in integrity. So it's doing the right thing, even when no one is looking. So that's basically when you have these 6 building blocks that I just went through, based on what the evidence has already said, you're going to have amazing leaders, and those behaviors are going to filter down to people in the front lines and middle management as well, and then people in the front lines. So what happens is the correlation here is that when you have amazing employee experience, what is that going to do to your customer experience, Chip?
I can't, again, as I think about this and I think about who's watching us, I know that that this is the goal. This is what everybody wants. I think about this, the whole premise of our show, even us getting on right now and you taking specific time out of your day to do this with us. The whole premise is that we are so busy as leaders, as just workers. We want to do a job and we want to do it well and we want to achieve those outcomes. We want to do all of that. And we get so busy and heads down and we just focus on doing those things and we miss things that are happening around us. The premise of the show is that, hey, while you're working, things are happening around you, and we bring guests like yourself on. I feel like you've taken this entire episode and really told us about things that we might have been keeping our heads down on and need to be thinking about. Is there anything else that in your mind that, like, hey, it's almost the end of the year, it's fourth quarter just about. Are there any other things that, that we should be thinking about as we move into the next year and say, you know what, pay attention to this as well?
Yeah. The thing that keeps popping in my head, because I stand in stages and I do this. On one hand, I said, you have to have relationships and you have to have results. You can't have one without the other. And it's another way of saying that don't put people ahead of profits, because in the research, the companies and the leaders that do really well, the companies that financially perform well, they put people ahead of profits. And guess what that does to their financial performance?
This is the profit.
Right. And so, but see, I mentioned at the beginning that we are not naturally wired. We have this mentality that goes back 50, 75, 100 years. We just haven't made the shift to more of a human workplace. and treating people like human beings, like valued people. And again, we can sit here for another hour and talk about how do we get rid of the politics? How do we get rid of people getting thrown under the bus and and backstabbed? All of those ugly corporate
truths.
Truths and metaphors. But it's true. We still live in this kind of world where those things are prevalent. We have to be able to shift. So as you go into the end of the year, into the next year, think about, how do I bring human elements of leading and working and belonging and even transfer the experience. So those are my parting words.
Awesome.
Today.
Well, Marcel, thank you so much for being with us. It's amazing how fast time actually has flown. You gave so much wisdom. My team, you guys can certainly hold me accountable to passing that leadership down. Giving you praise once a week. We're going to work on that a lot. Make sure that happens a lot. Marcel, it's so many great tips, so many great pieces of information. And I hope that all our viewers and watchers, that they will, take some of this to heart, literally, bring the humanity back to our workplaces. I know you've got a book coming out. We're going to put a bunch of links to different components and pieces. I know that book's still in the works, but let people follow you and do all that. So Rogue Nation will have all of that down in the show notes. This will be live in just a little while. It'll be over on gorogue.net in the Rogue Think section. And I invite all of you to catch an upcoming speaking engagement if you can with Marcel. So once again, I just appreciate all of you staying with us all the way here to the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us for this episode of While You Were Working, and we will see you next time.
Adios.